Well, let's jump to this story because this story may be somewhat related to the decline of the United States. Trump wants to issue green cards to foreign students who graduate college from SCNR. The proposal drew criticism from Rep. Thomas Massie, Laura Loomer, and Steve Bannon. Whoa. Hold on, Laura Loomer? I don't believe that. Where's it? She said, I love President Trump, but I don't agree that you can get a green card if you graduate from an American college. Millions of illegals here in America are on overstayed visas and green cards. She goes on to say, it's just loading. Giving green cards to college graduates from foreign nations is a policy that the base opposes. How can we trust that any vetting of foreigners on campuses would be done adequately when vetting in other areas like personnel has failed? It's no shocker that billionaires and big tech approve of importing immigrants to fulfill jobs in tech. I'm sure that big tech billionaires think the Indians in the call centers who handle our customer service and don't speak English are brilliant too. They aren't, though. These foreigners just take jobs away from Americans. And it's also why big tech was able to get away with stealing the election in 2020, as I wrote about in my book. She goes on to mention that many of the employees at big tech are foreigners, as big tech is no friend to MAGA. No more visas till every single illegal alien is deported. I got to tell you, when Laura Loomer comes out in disagreement with Trump, that's a policy Trump, I mean, she is the tip of the spear for Trump's base. No one is a bigger supporter. And if she's coming out strongly against it, now I got to say, I actually agree with Donald Trump.
Yeah.
On the surface. But let's argue it, and we'll get into the nuance.
Well, I don't agree with it, but if you guys want to stay your level.
Go ahead, Hannah Claire.
I mean, I think in large part, Laura's right? I think the policy of saying that if you come to America, you know, great, get your education, and we'll also let you stay here is harmful to both America and to the countries that students are coming from. If you have a student that is looking to be ambitious, to get an education, and to potentially develop skills in a career, I think it's also important that we don't siphon off the potential middle class of a country that could then fall into economic collapse and become more dependent on America.
But why are we spending money on their education in the first place?
I would be happy to not accept as many foreign students, but that's not the question that we have here. I think with green cards in particular, I think it's accurate to say that the students that are competing, that come to America for education, maybe it'd be good to help them build their economy if they return home with this education. Maybe they don't have access to it. But when they are now competing in the job market, I think that's a disadvantage to Americans. That is not fair. I also agree that ultimately it's very easy to stay in America on an expired visa. I think we should move towards a net zero migration policy. And so it's hard for me to sign off on a green card policy when ultimately we have unchecked immigration. I think we have to address illegal immigration first, but we have to address the fact that if you're a green card holder, you ultimately get a path to citizenship, and we've never addressed the consequences of chain migration. So it's just continuing to feed into an already unstable system, and I just don't think that we should use it as an election bargaining chip at this point.
The question is, how many? First, how many, Trump?
How many of these? Yeah. How many?
How many? You would say zero. Cards? You would accept none of them.
Zero. Probably. I mean, there is probably a very, very small amount I would compromise on, but I think you have to leave with zero.
100.
I don't know. I'd have to see that.
1,000. So here's the issue I see. You've got individuals in many different nations who desperately want to come to America because we're the best. That's why everybody wants to be here. We don't need to compete when we can brain drain the other countries. The question, however, is there is an upper limit that I think would probably be smaller than the average person be willing to accept. So when I say I agree with Trump on this one, it's only because Trump didn't really specify anything. He said we should give green cards to people who graduate college. I'm like, okay, 1,000 maybe? Because then the goal is you make it extremely, extremely difficult. You hit up Japan, India, Russia, any country, and say only the top 10 of your country will ever be allowed in American university. And then we get their best scientists. We get the best of their researchers, and then they can come here, come to our colleges. It would represent 0.0001% of our education base, but then we don't have to compete with people when they want to be here. We basically buy them out.
Yeah. But what if the top 10% just come here and, end up in woke indoctrination centers, and then we just end up with a bunch of woke immigrants.
And that's another
green cards.
That's another
UBI.
And that's another issue that isn't actually, and that doesn't actually argue Trump's point. So when Trump says this, and he says, I actually think we should give green cards with college degrees, my thought was that statement alone isn't enough for me to say Trump is wrong because it's too vague. The question first is how many? The second question is, will there be reform first?
Or what degrees, right? Because the thing
Exactly.
is, a lot of institutions in America, especially smaller private universities, need a certain amount of foreign students who can pay complete full cash tuition. They don't have to offer financial aid to be able to stay alive. You've seen so many colleges shutter over the last couple of years. This also happens with private high schools too. But you'll see towards the end, when there's a financial problem, you'll see the increase in the enrollment of foreign students in large part because they are relying on them for money.
Maybe those schools should shut down.
Yes,
Trump
maybe they
said
should.
this. So we got to reform the colleges first. But on the surface, I don't think the blanket statement is incorrect. It just requires a lot of caveats. Trump said, we bring these people, they come into this country, they go to our universities, and then they leave and become billionaires. They become millionaires and billionaires in their country producing products that we could have had control of. And I'm like, yes, I would much prefer that. I don't want world war. I don't want U.S. Empirical hegemonic power. We don't need that. Trump is the businessman. We secure our borders, we bring our jobs back, and then we brain drain our adversaries across the world. So if they want the flying car, we're the only one who makes it. Why? The better America becomes, the more the smartest people from insert country want to be here instead. And that will make it impossible for anyone to compete. They'll have to come here, and then we get it. That can push back war. That can give America international dominance. It can create even petrodollar dominance without combat conflict or drone strikes. So in order to get there, Bannon, Loomer, and Massey are critical of it because right now you can't do it.
No, you
The
definitely
universities
can't
are
do it right
broken.
now.
They're woke. We don't want to bring those people in on that. However, I would say you reform it. You set an upper limit of maybe 1,000, maybe it's 10,000. Because if we're talking about like 200 to 500,000 people, 10,000 is not that big a deal. It's got to be extremely difficult. The waiting list is going to be 20 years, and we only go for the highest income earners. And then, as you mentioned, which degrees is it going to be?
I was going to say, no green cards for gender studies. No, thank
None.
you.
No, nothing like
And
that.
then no remittances allowed. And limits on chain migration. Like, it can work if basically what we're saying is we don't want to give a dude who's going to invent the next, the flying car. We don't want to give that away.
My thing is just our immigration system is really broken. And so I don't think we should promise potential path to citizenship towards or permanent residency, whatever.
Yeah, it's not citizenship.
But if you get permanent residency, then you can move on to. I mean, ultimately, there are all kinds of doors open when you have the green card. But I just don't think that we should open this door until we have sealed the windows and, shored up our foundation, so to speak. I think we have enough issues, and I don't know that it would even benefit people who come here on a green card if we continue to have a country that's going into crisis because we cannot keep track of how many
Did
people
you
are
guys
here.
see how Alvin Bragg, who prosecuted Trump for 34 times of invoices and checks, he dropped all charges against all the agitators at Columbia who broke in and did graffiti and were violent and all of that stuff. All of those people, no charges.
Because the system is completely broken.
Yeah, it's completely broken, which is why I don't think there should be any kind of promises, regardless of how many caveats we could come up with.
I got to just go back to what we were talking about a little moment ago because, I had this big debate with on the culture war about social order decay and breakdown. And I'm just like, for the life of me, I cannot grasp how someone could be aware of what's going on in this country over the past 10 years and think we are not on a crash course with collapse. Because you go back 8 years, and the things I was saying, people were like, you're crazy. I'm like, I read an article that says civil war is possible in the United States. I'm like, that's nuts. That'll never happen. Then we had Charlottesville. No, that was a riot. That's no big deal. Okay. Then you had the Summer of Love riots.
2020, George Floyd.
Then you had Chaz
Which
Chop.
were really the COVID riots. I mean,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You had draconian lockdowns, forced medication. You had far leftists taking over cities. And I'm like, that escalated without resolution. Then you got January 6th because people wanted resolution to the crisis that we saw in summer and didn't get it. And now it's still happening. Now they're trying to lock Trump up.
and we're still waiting for the Fisher decision, which would really, if the Supreme Court ruled in favor, would vacate a lot of those.
The immunity question?
No, the Fisher.
Which one is that one?
So with it's a January 6th case.
Oh, right.
And it
The
basically
obstruction,
says,
right?
yeah, can you use, the congressional obstruction thing against protesters?
And if they just issued their ruling on presidential immunity and obstruction, we would actually be able to move forward quite.
But we can't. They're holding on to it, and it's going to be we have decision days, Wednesday and Thursday next week?
Yeah, it's going to be an October surprise or something. But looking at all this,
They have to release it
It'll
this
come next
term.
week.
They have to
because
release
the
it this
term
term.
ends next week. But
Okay.
it'll be. I bet it'll be Thursday. They'll
It's
wait
going to
as
be
long
the
as
end.
they can.
We'll see as soon as they start putting
mean-
up the fencing around the court.
Right, it's like the Roe decision, right? The Roe decision came on the very that day.
And we knew
Or
it was, and
the
at that
Dobbs
point, we knew it
decision.
was coming, you know? I mean, and there's a lot of really fascinating cases, too, that are still not yet to be decided. Missouri, the free speech one, the Bailey case. Chevron is interesting. The going again against on the Chevron case is interesting. So
I don't see how, when you look at all of this over the past 8 years, where it's just escalated nonstop to the point where we're now looking at the man who is the front runner to win, the favorite in the polls, the favorite in the fundraising, the celebrity superstar is facing prison time in numerous jurisdictions at the federal level and the state level. And people are saying, no, everything's fine and this is normal. I'm just like, man, at a certain point, you have to be like, something weird has happened to this country.
I think something weird is happening. And I do think that it's not the country it certainly seems far different from the country that I grew up in.
What is weird? Can we describe what the weird thing is, or is it too ambiguous to be?
Well, one thing that's weird is how if you are on the opposite political side as someone else, you can't have a conversation
You're
with them.
enemies.
You can't be friends. You can't be married.
Right.
Like there's all this stuff. I mean, when I was a kid, my stepmom was a Democrat and my dad was a Republican, and they argued about like Walter Mondale and Ronald Reagan at the dinner table, and they would get rather heated, and then they would drink a gallon jug of Ernest and Julio Gallo or whatever, and like watch comedy shows and go on their merry way or whatever it was that they did. I ignored them, but that you used to be able to do that. My grandfather would be of one opinion, my mom would have a different opinion, they would argue, and then we'd have dinner. And now it's like, if you disagree with your parents, you're supposed to go no contact and never speak to them again. If your best friend is like dating a Republican, you're not supposed to talk to her, and you're supposed to tell her to break up with that guy. There's like all of this kind of stuff that's very different from when I was a kid. There's also this thing where we used to have cultural similarities. When I was a kid, we'd all watch the same shows on Thursday night. Like it was the Cosby Show. We all watched the Cosby Show, like come into school, everyone had watched the same thing. You'd all talk about, what did you guys have for dinner last night? Because for the most part, we all sat there at a dinner table with whatever was left of our families and like ate together, you know what I mean? And that kind of stuff is very different. And I think that there's a lot more cultural fragmentation. So there's a lot of things that are very different. No one really goes to work anymore, at a certain economic
Right.
level.
It's definitely a pulling apart. It's amazing to think that you can't compromise with your friend who thinks about anything differently than you politically. We talked at a poll somewhat recently. Back in the day, parents, if you were Catholic or religious, whatever, you would rather have your child marry someone of a different political party than of a different religion. And now that's not the case at all.
Well, now there's no religion. And we also have a weird homogenization, right? It used to be that if you went to different parts of the country, people had different accents. And that's different now, too. It's like no matter where you go in the country, everyone kind of talks the same. There's a lot of the
buys
same
the same
slang.
stuff. We go to the same
We
fast
go to
food
the
places because they're kind of everywhere.
Yeah, there's nothing. There used to be regional differences. You'd go to the Grand Canyon and you'd find something, some kind of food you never ate before, and other than prairie oysters, it's not really, there's not that many differences.
Thanks for checking out this clip from Timcast IRL. Make sure to watch the show live Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. Subscribe to this channel, and we will see you all there.